The desert does not begin with sand, but with silence. And sometimes, in that silence, there are shadows that do not move. The city of Petra is one of them. Not built, but removed, slowly, deliberately, from the living rock of southern Jordan. 4 centuries, no maps marked it. No empires claimed it. And yet, it was there, sealed in stone. To the traveler, Petra arrives without warning. The sick, a narrow chasm more wound than road, coils through red rock like a memory refusing to end. At its narrowest point, only light passes through. At its deepest, footsteps are muffled by centuries of forgotten direction. Then, suddenly, an opening, a columned facade emerging from the canyon wall, impossibly precise. Not added to the world, but subtracted from it. Petra is not hidden by nature. It is hidden by design. By the time the Western world discovered it in 1812, through the veiled route of Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt posing as an Arab scholar, Petra had already outlived its era. But it had not been forgotten. Among local Bedouin tribes, its name was never lost, only guarded. Called Rakhmu, its true identity had been displaced by another name. Petra, the Latin word for rock. The Romans could not pronounce what they could not understand. And perhaps they weren't meant to. The opening tension rests here. How could an entire civilization, advanced enough to redirect water, sculpt monumental architecture, and dominate desert trade for centuries, simply vanish? Why is there no written history of their decline? Why did they choose to bury their memory not in earth, but in the permanence of stone? History names its victors. But Petra is not defeated. It is missing. There are no city walls. No outer gates. No perimeter defenses. This was not a city that feared assault. It was a city that feared being known. We begin not with what was lost, but with what was withheld. By the 1st century BCE, the Nabataean kingdom had become one of the wealthiest civilizations in the ancient Near East. Stretching from Damascus to the Red Sea, it held sway over the incense routes from Arabia to the Mediterranean. Gold, spices, textiles, and knowledge passed through Petra. But little was kept. Their palaces held no archives. Their temples, no codices. They did not hoard. They hid. When Augustus reformed the Roman calendar in 8 BCE, he did so to standardize power across provinces. Time itself was brought under empire. And yet Petra, just beyond formal annexation, kept its own temporal rhythm. Inscriptions from Nabataean tombs use a calendar that does not align with Rome's. Their dates float, off by months, sometimes years. Some believe these dates were altered after the fact. Or perhaps, they were never meant to match. The contradiction deepens. The Nabataeans were not primitive. They engineered siphoning tunnels, irrigation networks, and flood control systems capable of sustaining over 20,000 inhabitants in an uninhabitable region. Their architecture is not ornamental, it is algorithmic. Temple placement aligns with solstice sun patterns. Reservoirs are positioned for maximum pressure retention after sudden rainfall. The city lives through precision. And yet, no literature. No philosophical treatises. No founding charter. Petra exists like a sentence half-spoken. The words are there, but the voice is gone. In 1985, UNESCO declared Petra a World Heritage Site. The designation celebrated its beauty, its artistry, its preservation, but not its philosophy. The why of Petra remains unsaid. Even now, archaeologists admit that less than 15% of the city has been excavated. The rest remains buried, either by sediment or by intent. Entire districts, temples, and tunnels lie beneath feet that will never feel them. Some chambers are deliberately sealed. Others are filled in from within. This was not a city that collapsed. It was a city that closed itself. A place built to be entered, but not understood. Sound behaves strangely in the sick. Shouts are swallowed. Whispers travel. The walls act like memory, amplifying what's soft, silencing what's loud. Travelers in the 19th century reported hearing footsteps hours after they were taken, echoes delayed by geometry. The city does not forget sound. It delays it. Petra teaches a quiet lesson. Survival may not require monuments. It may require removal. To be remembered is a kind of risk. The Nabataeans did not gamble on legacy. They gambled on silence. What if that is not failure? What if that is a form of genius we no longer recognize? Outside the sick, the desert howls. Inside, it breathes. And the question begins to form. Not fully, not clearly, but insistently. What does it mean when a people do not fall, but retreat into stone? The desert is often imagined as blank space, a void between empires. But it is never empty. It is edited. What remains on its surface is not the whole. And the roads that cross it, so easily drawn on maps, are not always meant to be followed both ways. Petra's survival depended on one principle: control the route, not the destination. The Nabataeans knew the power of passage. They mastered it without claiming land. Their trade network spanned thousands of kilometers, from the frankincense groves of southern Arabia to the marble ports of the Mediterranean. But no traveler, no merchant, no diplomat ever stumbled into Petra by accident. The city did not offer directions. It offered only thresholds. One of those thresholds is the sick. Over 1.2 kilometers long, this natural fault line-turned ceremonial passage cuts through towering sandstone, narrowing to just 2 meters in places. But the sick is not merely geological. Its curvature is engineered, its bends misleading, its entrance indistinct. In heavy rain, the floor floods. In wind, the air whistles but does not carry sound. It disorients before it reveals. The entrance to Petra is not marked by a gate. It is marked by a silence that tightens. The Nabataeans reinforced this illusion of seclusion. Cisterns carved high into the canyon walls collect and reroute water away from the sick's path, keeping it dry even during seasonal flash floods. Sculpted channels run invisibly along the base of the walls, lined with ceramic pipes. These were not built for comfort. They were built for uncertainty. The city could appear only when it chose to. And when it chose to vanish, nothing would remain but rock. The ancient Romans respected roads. They paved them as signatures. But in Petra's case, the roads twist, fracture, and dissolve, leading inward, then refusing to exit. Roman cartographers never plotted the direct line to Petra. Even Ptolemy's geography, compiled in the 2nd century CE, lists the city under an alternate name, Recum, but omits its coordinates. That omission is not error. It is policy. Petra's entire geography is tactical. Its entrances are few, and all are narrow. The cliffs surrounding the basin city serve not as natural defense, but as narrative filter. Visitors arrived filtered by intention. If they could reach Petra, they had been allowed. And this filtering extended beyond terrain. Nabataean control of trade was selective. Merchants were often granted access to supply depots at the city's edge, but not to the city itself. Caravanserais, resting places for camels and traders, were intentionally built outside the city's visual perimeter. Distant, peripheral. The goods passed through. The story did not. A single road leads into Petra. None is built to return. Petra's central structures reinforce the architecture of unidirectionality. The Kazna, commonly misnamed the Treasury, stands as a false beginning. Elaborate, columned, crowned with statues long disfigured by time, it arrests attention. But it is a decoy. It is a tomb, not a temple. It does not begin the city. It ends the canyon. And just beyond it, the path diverges, widens, and vanishes into a hidden valley where the rest of Petra waits. Ancient travelers describe the experience like waking from sleep. That was not a metaphor. That was design. Petra's internal layout is paradoxical. Streets do not conform to civic grids. They drift. Temple complexes are oriented not toward central squares, but toward cliffs and constellations. Light hits altars at specific angles only a few days a year. Movement through the city is choreographed, not efficient. Every step draws the visitor deeper, emotionally, symbolically, even politically. This was not a place meant for maps. It was meant for memory. And memory, like stone, can be shaped. In the early 20th century, as aerial mapping began over the Jordanian plateau, British surveyors noticed an anomaly. A number of Nabataean roads visible from above were incomplete. They traced elegant arcs across the landscape, then stopped, mid-slope, mid-desert, with no terminus. When geologists investigated further, they found the roads were not abandoned. They were buried, deliberately. Sections of compacted earth and stone had been covered with sand and ash. Hidden, not by erosion, but by effort. No official record explains who buried them, or why. The implication is quiet, but disturbing. The Nabataeans had not only designed how to be found, they had designed how to disappear. This ability, the selective presentation of self, disturbed later powers. When the Roman general Aulus Cornelius Palma annexed the Nabataean kingdom in 106 CE, he noted in a surviving report that the cities accepted order without resistance. But there is no record of his troops entering Petra. Perhaps they didn't need to. Perhaps they couldn't. By the mid-2nd century, Roman milestones and road markers began replacing Nabataean ones across Arabia. But in the Petra basin, no such markers have been found. Only eroded stone platforms, like erased signatures, litter the hillsides. It's not that roads stopped leading to Petra. It's that Petra stopped leading to anything. And this silence, the way in, but not the way out, was not limited to the physical. Pilgrims who arrived at Petra often did not record their journey. Nabataean religious rites were deeply local, but also deliberately opaque. The gods they worshipped, Dushra, Al-Uzza, have no mythic literature, only faceless monuments and altars. No hymns, no origin stories, not even a creation myth. The gods are there, but they do not speak. Neither do the priests. When the Babylonian exile reshaped Jewish religious identity in the 6th century BCE, and when Hellenistic rule restructured Greek polytheism into civic pantheons, the Nabataeans remained unmoved. Their rites continued, hidden, private, untranslated. Religious scholars now believe this resistance to textualization was not ignorance. It was protection. They preserved not through repetition, but through disappearance. And slowly, the echo faded. No major conflict marks Petra's fall. No fire. No siege. No catastrophic drought. When the city begins to decline in the late 4th century CE, it does so invisibly. Water systems fall into disrepair. Altars show signs of reuse. Tombs are left unfinished. By the time the Crusaders arrived nearly 8 centuries later, the city was no longer a city. It was legend. And even the footsteps had stopped echoing. Because the geometry had shifted. The city had chosen silence over preservation. Not to be remembered. To be safe. The architect of a locked vault does not leave the key nearby. The Nabataeans didn't just disappear. They erased the trails that could be followed back. A civilization carved into permanence, then sealed itself shut. And the question remains. What else was lost in the roads they buried? In Petra, the stones speak. But the words they carry do not tell stories. They declare ownership. They announce death. They consecrate, but they do not explain. Of the thousands of inscriptions found across Nabataean territory, etched into cliff faces, carved above tombs, inked onto ceramic, none recount the beginning of the kingdom. None define its laws. None record a single named king's thoughts. There is no founding myth, no royal decree, no scroll of unification. It was a kingdom without a signature. The Nabataeans spoke a dialect of Northwest Semitic, closely related to early Aramaic. Their written form, what scholars now call Nabataean script, eventually evolved into the Arabic alphabet. It is a critical link in the region's linguistic history. And yet, while their script survives in shape, their voice does not. The evolution from Nabataean to Arabic is not an accident of language. It is a process of overwriting, one begun under Rome, continued through Byzantium, and completed under early Islamic caliphates. The script remains, but the syntax, idioms, and oral rhythms are gone. Linguists have attempted to reconstruct fragments of the Nabataean lexicon, but most attempts end in echo. The inscriptions left behind rarely exceed names and dates. A father, a son, a dedication to a god, a burial notice, often in formulaic repetition, etched into cliff walls with meticulous brevity. No deviation, no narrative. This was not illiteracy. It was intentional compression. To reduce language to marks of presence only, not meaning, is to remove vulnerability. The less said, the less that can be altered. In a region devoured by empires and rewritten by scribes, the Nabataeans chose a quieter permanence. And yet, traces remain. In 1993, during a restoration survey at the Petra church, a 5th-century Byzantine basilica built atop earlier Nabataean ruins, archaeologists discovered hundreds of charred scroll fragments hidden beneath floor mosaics. Scorched by a fire in the 7th century, the scrolls had fused into blackened layers, illegible by the eye, but not by algorithm. Under infrared imaging, more than 140 parchment texts emerged. Written in Greek, they documented land transactions, personal disputes, and church accounting. But buried among them were isolated names and terms previously unknown, words that may have derived from a now-lost Nabataean dialect. Names that do not appear in Greek or Latin genealogy. Agricultural terms not found in Aramaic. Some of these fragments were signed with seals resembling Nabataean symbology, but distorted, as though the language had been partially preserved, then mispronounced. Linguistic drift is natural, but this felt curated. The silence had not been accidental. It had been enforced. The Roman annexation of Nabataea in 106 CE marks a linguistic turning point. Latin inscriptions begin to replace Nabataean script on coins, milestones, and temple markers. Within 2 generations, the script vanishes from official use. Tombs dated after 150 CE revert to Greek or adopt hybridized Aramaic. This is not evolution. It is formatting. It is the act of standardizing away identity. The Nabataean script, curved and flowing, was designed for speed. It was often written in ink on parchment and papyrus, most of which has not survived the desert's slow decomposition. What remains are chisel marks, durable but mute. These inscriptions suggest a language meant for gesture and inflection, what oral historians describe as breath-driven culture. A world where meaning lived in voice, not shape. But voice does not survive stone. The Nabataeans did not build libraries, not in the classical sense. But absence does not confirm ignorance. Evidence from contemporaneous Arabian kingdoms, like the Sabaeans and Lihianites, indicates the region was rich with poetic tradition, legal discourse, and cosmological theory. Some scholars believe the Nabataeans preserved knowledge through recitation, ritualized performance, spoken only at thresholds and ceremonies. If so, the loss of their voice was not just cultural. It was systemic. What empire cannot document, it deletes. In 1871, a fire tore through the Royal Library of Turin in Italy. Among the damaged holdings were early Orientalist transcriptions of Middle Eastern inscriptions, some copied from Petra by 19th-century surveyors. Dozens of pages were lost. The transcriptions had never been published. Only one image remains, a lithograph of a Nabataean inscription half buried in a cliff face, its lines trailing off into weathered stone. Beneath it, a translator's hand had begun to reconstruct a sentence. It stops after 3 words. No record explains why the page ends. But that is the shape of Nabataean history. Cut short, rephrased, or left blank. Their names survive on tombs, Shakalit, Aretas, Hulayil. But even those drift. King Aretas IV, the most documented ruler of the Nabataean dynasty, is known more from external Roman records than from within Petra itself. His reign was long, stable, and prosperous. But no statue bears his likeness. No edict carries his law. He exists like a shadow cast from another light. And perhaps that was the point. To leave too deep an impression is to be stepped on. The Nabataeans understood that. Their inscriptions do not celebrate conquest. They do not glorify victory. They mark survival. May his name endure, many read. Or simply, he was. The concept of identity here is not expansionist. It is recursive. Even their gods refused singular shape. Dushara, lord of the Nabataean pantheon, is represented not by an idol, but by a black stone block, often featureless. A presence, not an image. Uncarved. Unnamed in iconography. It is a refusal of portrait. A refusal of capture. And perhaps that explains the greatest absence of all. There is no definitive Nabataean chronicle. No record of their origin story. No ancestral line traced to divine right. They arrive in the historical record abruptly. First as nomads, then as traders, then as a kingdom. Like the city they built, their identity does not emerge from construction. It emerges from subtraction. What does it mean to inherit a language that survives in shape, but not in voice? To speak in letters whose origin has been severed from meaning? And what does it mean for a civilization to shape the structure of future language, while its own words are lost? The stones remain. The script endures. But the story no longer knows how to say itself. In Petra, water does not flow. It is led. This place, red-stoned, wind-worn, blistered by summer and silenced by winter frost, should not have been livable. It receives, on average, less than 15 centimeters of rain each year. No river feeds it. No natural springs define it. And yet, for centuries, tens of thousands of people lived here, not in desperation, but in stability. The mystery is not only how they survived. It is how they made survival predictable. The Nabataeans understood something others did not. Water is not a gift of geography. It is an outcome of geometry. Petra's hydrological system is one of the least understood and most advanced in the pre-modern world. More than 200 cisterns, reservoirs, aqueducts, and ceramic pipe channels have been mapped across the region. Many still functional, others lost beneath landslides and sediment. These were not built for spectacle. They were hidden. Carved into the landscape, lined with lime-based waterproofing, sealed by angled stone caps invisible from the path. Not one drop was left to chance. To see Petra from above is to realize it is not carved into rock, but woven through water. The cliffs collect. The chasms funnel. The walls redirect. It begins with rainfall. Seasonal storms strike suddenly in this region, violent, brief, and rare. The Nabataeans designed entire sections of the city not around housing, but around catchment. The Sick itself is part of this system. Just before it narrows, subtle ledges slope down into buried holding tanks. Storm runoff is split, sent through dual channels on either side of the gorge, descending in synchronized gradients. This is not just drainage. It is choreography. Some of these tanks are sealed from above. Others were opened only seasonally, when rainfall had ceased and evaporation threatened reserves. They are covered not with lids, but with slabs made indistinct from natural stone. Archaeologists misidentified them for decades. Water became the city's hidden currency, more valuable than gold, because it could not be stolen, only understood. And Petra's entire layout is designed to ensure that understanding remained exclusive. Throughout the inner city, water pressure is managed by gradual descent. Channels from the upper basin lead to households, temples, and public spaces, where it emerges not in fountains, but in troughs cut under shadow. The system uses gravity, but mimics control. There are no splashes, no visible flows. Water appears still. This stillness is not natural. It is mathematical. In 2012, a structural hydrologist examining Petra's main cisterns made an unsettling observation. The slope gradients and release angles mirrored certain Roman aqueduct ratios, but Petra's date of construction predates those aqueducts by over a century, which means either parallel innovation, or Petra taught Rome, and Rome did not return the credit. What Petra lacked in empire, it made up for in engineering anonymity. Roman infrastructure glorified scale. Nabataean infrastructure glorified discretion. And this discretion extended to the sacred. The high place of sacrifice, a platform carved atop a mountain above the city, appears isolated. Wind lashes its edges. The climb is steep, ritualistic. But behind it, hidden within the rock, is a channel system that funnels collected rain into a cistern tucked just beneath the peak. A sacred space with secret sustenance. This connection between water and the divine is everywhere in Petra. Temples align with not just stars, but with aquifers. Tombs are oriented toward valleys where runoff collects. To the Nabataeans, water was not only survival, it was sanctity. It was what tied the city to the unseen. And the unseen had to be protected. In 1963, during excavations near the Qasr al-Bint temple, archaeologists discovered a series of ceramic pipes leading into a chamber that had no entrance. Breaking through the sandstone, they uncovered a sealed reservoir, still partially filled. Its water, undisturbed for over 1,500 years, had not evaporated. Its walls had been coated in a mixture of crushed ceramics and limestone dust. No other example of this coating has been found in Petra, or anywhere else in Nabataean territory. No records describe how it was made. No inscriptions name who built it. Only silence surrounds it. The reservoir may have been for ritual, or for survival in siege, or for something else. Its purpose remains uncertain. But the fact remains, the Nabataeans buried water, as others bury treasure. The paradox sharpens. Why would a civilization, so gifted in hydrological mastery, choose a location nearly devoid of natural water? The answer may not be practical. It may be philosophical. To build where life should not exist, and then sustain it, is to challenge fate. Other ancient cities rose along rivers. Petra rose where the river did not. And that absence became its shield. Invading armies depend on known supply routes, predictable wells, accessible rivers. Petra offered none. Even if found, it could not be taken. Its lifeblood was internal, concealed, layered beneath centuries of carved intention. And in time, even that lifeblood disappeared. By the 5th century CE, many of the cisterns had silted. The channels cracked. Earthquakes shifted the alignment. And as Byzantine and early Islamic periods reshaped the region's urban centers, Petra fell outside the new routes. Its water stopped flowing, not from failure, but from neglect. What was hidden too well was simply not found again. And yet, traces return. In the early 2000s, following rare rains, satellite thermal imaging revealed underground moisture trails in Petra's western hills, ghost veins, long dry. Some connect to known cisterns. Others do not. Beneath the visible city lies another city, one stored in silence. A city of water. A city without rivers. A city whose survival was not the result of abundance, but of deliberate, cultivated scarcity. They made the empty place full. And then, they walked away, leaving only the question. What else did they make that we have mistaken for absence? Most cities rise. Petra recedes. Its structures are not raised above ground, but hollowed into it, subtracted rather than constructed. Temples, tombs, dwellings, even amphitheaters, shaped not from stacked stone, but from what was removed. This is not mere practicality. It is a worldview, that permanence does not come from addition, but from absence made deliberate. Petra is not built. It is revealed. The scale is staggering. More than 800 individual monuments curve out of the rock, some towering over 40 meters tall, others so discreet they disappear in shadow. But they are not standalone works. They are part of the mountain, integrated in slope, grain, and alignment. This city does not impose itself upon the land. It cohabits with it, and it breathes. To enter one of Petra's tombs is to feel temperature shift. Coolness, stillness, a quiet so complete it feels inhabited. These chambers were carved with a logic beyond utility. They regulate airflow. They mute sound. Some amplify whispers. Others disorient footsteps. The design is not defensive. It is psychological. They shape how one moves and how one remembers. Throughout the inner basin, the city's architecture follows no uniform grid. Columns emerge from cliff faces at irregular intervals. Stairways lead upward into mountain flanks, then vanish. The result is not chaos, but choreography. Petra teaches its visitors to wander, to slow, to look upward. In that slowing, something begins to emerge. Not a narrative, but a sensation that the city is not showing all of itself. Because it isn't. Petra's builders did not carve randomly. Every feature serves both functional and symbolic purpose. The monumental facades, so often mistaken for temples, are mostly tombs. But they do not signify death. They signify transformation. Their facades mimic architectural forms from Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia, but abstracted, reinterpreted, blended. This was not imitation. It was translation. Each carved pediment, false column, and crowned urn serves dual purpose: to communicate fluency in other cultures, and to obscure the city's internal logic behind familiar symbols. To see Petra's architecture as derivative is to misunderstand it entirely. It does not borrow forms. It absorbs them. And then it reshapes them into something unclassifiable. Take the urn tomb, for instance, one of the city's royal monuments, its purpose debated for decades. Its upper chamber is vast, echoing, and empty. The only light enters from a single, high window cut into the cliff wall. At midday, the sunlight aligns perfectly with the rear altar niche, illuminating a carved panel whose symbols remain undeciphered. Was it a throne room? A solar temple? A crypt? Perhaps it was all three. Or perhaps Petra resists that distinction entirely. In 2016, ground-penetrating radar was deployed near the monument. Beneath it, a rectangular void was detected, sealed off, inaccessible. A room beneath the tomb. No records mention it. No entrance has been found. The chamber remains unopened. The design of Petra's interiors speaks even when it conceals. Chambers taper inward, funneling attention, not dispersing it. Light is modulated, not admitted. Walls are smooth, then suddenly etched. In several tombs, patterns emerge in the stone, geometric striations in purples, reds, and golds, caused by iron and manganese deposits. But some of these natural patterns form repeating shapes: spirals, chevrons, latticework. Coincidence or intention? No Nabataean texts describe artistic theory, but that does not mean theory was absent. Just as their control of water was mathematical, their manipulation of light and form was spatially precise. Some scholars now argue that Petra was built as a sensory system, a city not to be understood, but to be experienced. And in that experience, memory embeds itself. Cognitive scientists refer to this as place encoding, the ability of space to alter memory retention. Environments of unique geometry, color, and sound imprint more deeply. Petra may have been built to harness this, deliberately shaping how people would remember it, or forget it. This would explain its paradox. A city vast enough to house tens of thousands, and yet designed so that only fragments can ever be known at once. Every view is partial. Every monument frames a question. There is no single vantage point, no axis of clarity. It is a city that never stands fully visible. Elsewhere in the ancient world, carved cities also emerge, but none at this scale. Cappadocia, in modern-day Turkey, houses underground cities carved by early Christian communities. Ellora, in India, holds rock-cut temples of multiple faiths stacked in subterranean harmony. And Madawan Sala, in Saudi Arabia, mirrors Petra's tomb facades almost precisely. Less a sibling, more an echo. But Petra's difference lies in its entirety. It is not a city with carved features. It is a carved city. The landscape is not backdrop, it is architect. There is no separation between natural and constructed. Even its open plazas are shaped by the negative space between cliffs. In Petra, space is not filled. It is sculpted by removal. And in that removal, something greater is asked. What does it mean to create not to be seen, but to be felt? Because Petra feels inhabited, even in silence. The facades may be weathered. The inscriptions may have faded. But the space holds presence. Not metaphorically, tangibly. Step inside the silk tomb, where mineral veins flow across the walls like frozen rain. It is empty. And yet, nothing feels vacant. As though something remains. Not a person, not a god, but a pressure. A held breath. An unfinished sentence. A memory that refuses to fade. Petra teaches something we no longer believe, that architecture is not for containment. It is for transmission, not of messages, but of something quieter. Intention. To shape absence, deliberately, is not to erase meaning. It is to control how and whether it returns. And perhaps that is Petra's most unnerving lesson. It was built not to last forever, but to outlast forgetting. For a time, Petra pulsed with movement. Camels entered through shadowed clefts in the cliffs, bearing incense from Dhofar, gold from Nubia, textiles from the Levant. Traders did not settle here. They passed. And yet, they remembered the city, spoke of it in hushed reverence. A city that taxed, but did not demand. A city that enriched, without conquering. A city that watched. But Petra did not grow through conquest. It grew through precision. The Nabataean kingdom controlled one of the most elusive assets in the ancient world, the right to pass without being stopped. From the 4th century BCE to the early 2nd century CE, the Nabataeans rose not by building empires, but by mastering intervals, those unseen zones between empires, between river valleys, between known cities. They held no great armies. They erected no border walls. And yet, for over 4 centuries, they channeled wealth along corridors where others saw only wilderness. Their empire was not a place. It was a pathway. The Incense Road, an ancient network of overland trade stretching from the southern Arabian Peninsula to the ports of the Mediterranean, ran directly through Petra. But it was not a single road. It was a lattice of decisions, permissions, and subtle delays. Every caravan that passed was measured, not always taxed in gold, sometimes in goods, in influence, in silence. The Nabataeans did not require dominance. They required dependence. Their position gave them leverage. Their discretion made them trusted. By 100 BCE, the city was collecting tribute not only from merchants but from neighboring polities. The Seleucids, the Hasmoneans, and even early Roman diplomats acknowledged Nabataean control, not in public decrees, but in shifted routes and altered schedules. Petra was never stormed. It was negotiated with. And this arrangement held until it no longer served Rome. In 106 CE, under Emperor Trajan, the Nabataean kingdom was annexed. But no battle is recorded, no siege, only an administrative absorption. A new province was created, Arabia Petrea, and Petra was made one of its central hubs. Latin inscriptions begin to appear. Roads are reclassified. Milestones reset. But here, something strange happens. Instead of building Petra outward, extending its reach, Rome begins to route around it. New roads are constructed leading to Bostra in the north and Aqaba on the Red Sea. Caravans are redirected. Petra becomes picturesque, not pivotal. Its architecture remains untouched, but its relevance begins to rot from beneath. It is erased not by war, but by rerouting. The famed Roman road, the Via Nova Traiana, was completed between 111 and 114 CE, stretching from Bostra to Aqaba. It passes through Petra, but only barely. The road clips the city's edge, as if acknowledging it only out of obligation. The heart of Petra is left untouched, bypassed by the rhythm of empire. That was not neglect. It was strategy. Rome understood that to fully absorb a place like Petra, it had to neutralize the very thing that made it powerful, its mastery of in-between. And so, the spaces between were sealed. Tribute ceased. The Nabataean trade apparatus disbanded. Local priests lost authority. The temples stood, but no longer received incense. Commerce continued, but only as logistics. Not exchange. Not culture. Petra became a post, not a place. The shift is subtle in documents, but devastating in practice. By the mid-2nd century, the Nabataean script disappears from all official inscriptions. Roman coinage replaces Nabataean symbols. And in a chilling administrative reform, the city's native religious festivals are deregistered, no longer tax-exempt, no longer regionally recognized. To erase a belief, it seems, Rome simply stopped acknowledging its calendar. The system that once depended on Petra now functioned independently of it. The roads, the same roads the Nabataeans had used to extend influence, were reprogrammed. The flows reversed. The city that once controlled direction now received it. But the memory of that control did not disappear easily. For decades, Nabataean influence lingered at the margins. Petroglyphs continued to be carved in the highlands. Caravan masters continued to refer to Petra by its original name, Rakhmu. But slowly, inevitably, the infrastructure of forgetting took root. The roads remained, but they forgot how to return. A Roman historian writing in the late 2nd century CE remarks that Petra was a city of tombs with no living. It's a poetic dismissal, but not entirely inaccurate. Petra's grandeur persisted, but its voice had been stilled. Even local tribes, once aligned with Nabataean trade, were relocated or absorbed. The Edomites vanished. The Kedarites faded. The delicate network of interdependency was reduced to a straight line, Rome's preferred geometry. But the geometry of Petra was never linear. In 2001, an aerial survey of the surrounding Wadi Musa region revealed an odd pattern. Ancient caravan paths had not been fully erased. They were simply buried, beneath Roman roadbeds, under Byzantine ruins, beside Crusader fortifications. The Nabataean roads, it seems, had not disappeared. They had been paved over, layered over stone, as though silence required foundation. Petra's disappearance, then, was not collapse. It was containment. And that is perhaps the more unsettling thought. To vanish in ruin is one thing. To be preserved in partial function, hollowed, honored, and emptied, is another. Petra was not destroyed. It was edited. Its walls still stood. But what passed through them no longer mattered. And yet, the city waited, as if aware that empire, like trade, moves in cycles. Because to remove a city from the center of the map does not remove it from the mind. Not when it was built with such intention. Not when its stones still face the stars. The roads may have forgotten how to return, but the city remembers where they were. What happens when a civilization refuses to write its memory, but builds it instead? In Petra, there are no scrolls, no codices, no centralized archive of law, trade, or theology. And yet, the city holds memory, not in script, in space. It is tempting to call this loss, to mourn the absence of Nabataean literature, as if forgetting were failure. But what if forgetting was not a lapse, but a decision? Petra remembers differently. Its archive is architectural. Each chamber, threshold, shadow, and slope, each transition from light to silence, is part of a system of stored meaning. A spatial language built not to be read, but to be moved through. To walk Petra is to page through that archive. and the pages do not always open. Consider the tombs. Over 600 have been identified. Their facades bear names and symbols, but inside they are often empty. No sarcophagi, no remains. Only smooth walls, scorched ceilings, and a stillness that resists interpretation. Many were sealed shortly after construction. Some may never have been opened. These were not graves. They were statements. To carve a monument and then withhold its function, to display only the surface, is to exert control over what is remembered and what is assumed. The tomb's present meaning then retract it. This is not absence. It is deliberate ambiguity. In a Western paradigm, the archive is a place of accumulation. It stores, protects, reveals on request. Petra operates otherwise. It offers nothing on demand. It does not present its knowledge. It encases it silently, sometimes permanently. And perhaps that silence is the protection. The Byzantine reoccupation of Petra in the 4th and 5th centuries brought Christian iconography, Greek inscriptions, and church foundations layered directly atop Nabataean temples. But few of these conversions penetrated deeply. The sanctuaries, it seems, had no doors, or the doors had been erased. In the Petra church, where hundreds of charred scrolls were discovered, stone inscriptions on the subfloor remain undeciphered. Greek basilicas were built above rooms whose shapes follow an older geometry. Rooms that align with solstice light. Rooms that echo when stepped on. None of these features were inherited by the churches. They were buried beneath them. As if two systems of meaning had been stacked, but only one permitted visibility. And what of the temples? The Qasr al-Bint, Petra's main freestanding sanctuary, is one of the few structures not carved but built. It stands at the end of the city's ceremonial colonnade, alone, massive, scarred by earthquakes but still vertical. Its internal altar has no inscription. Its central cella, where the god Dushra may have been honored, contains only a single elevated niche and burnished stone. No images, no doctrine, no liturgy. If this was the city's most sacred site, it is also its most silent. The absence of iconography is not an oversight. Dushra, the principal god of the Nabataeans, was represented by betyls, an iconic stone blocks, smooth and upright. They are found throughout Petra, always unmarked. Their meaning resides not in likeness, but in placement. A god who resists depiction requires an architecture that does not explain. In 1987, beneath a collapsed retaining wall near the high place of sacrifice, archaeologists uncovered a series of sealed niches. Inside were small betyls, aligned in rows, facing west. No inscriptions, no offerings, only presence. Who placed them? And why here, where no one could see? The answer may lie in a logic we no longer practice. In Petra, to hide a sacred object was not to obscure its function. It was to activate it. To believe in something was not to display it. It was to bury it into the fabric of place. The city, then, is not a record of its gods. It is a habitat for their return. And this return is not symbolic. It is spatial. Petra's urban layout has no central axis, no palace, no acropolis. But it has paths that wind between temples, shadowed spaces, and high places. These paths are not efficient. They are ritualized. And ritual, in Petra, is not prescribed. It is embedded. Step into the obelisk tomb. The ceiling is scorched. The walls taper into darkness. Just beyond the burial chamber, a passage curves downward, cut through rock, twisting gently. It leads not to another tomb, but to a chamber with no known function. Sound shifts there. Light never reaches it directly. There are no records of its purpose. Some call it a storeroom, others, a shrine. But perhaps it was never meant to be understood, only to be entered. This is Petra's archive. It does not catalog events. It curates experience. And in that experience, a different kind of knowledge survives. Tactile, temporal, post-verbal. The kind of knowing that cannot be translated. This refusal to write memory in paper or parchment would doom Petra in a world of record keepers. But perhaps that was Petra's gamble, that the most vulnerable knowledge is the kind that can be copied. So they built it where copying was impossible. In stone. In silence. In rooms with no doors. What if they did not forget to preserve? What if they succeeded too well? High above Petra, past stairways chiseled from cliff, past ridgelines where wind tears through the bones of the city, there is a structure unlike any other in the kingdom. A sanctuary not on the ground, but raised, where the mountain flattens and the stone turns white. It is called the High Place of Sacrifice. But this is a name given later. The original name is not known. No inscription marks it. No text describes it. Only the architecture speaks, and even that, in contradiction. There is an altar, but no offering pit. There is a platform, but no temple walls. There are drain channels, but they lead to nowhere. A temple with no priests. A ritual space that closes against the sky. The entire summit is carved. The floor smoothed, the ledges squared. 2 obelisks stand nearby, carved directly from the mountain's crown. They do not point. They remain. Eroded by centuries of sun and frost, they are not Egyptian in form, nor Mesopotamian in symbol. They belong to a language of presence, not reference. They are not monuments to gods. They are what remains when the god has left the image. Climbing here is not easy. Even now, the ascent takes nearly an hour. It is a processional path, narrow, asymmetric, often silent. A sequence of transitions, from basin to ledge, from wall to sky. No one stumbles into this place. To arrive is to have entered into something. But what? Some scholars suggest the high place served as a ritual site for animal sacrifice. The shallow basin carved into the floor, the drainage grooves etched away from the altar stone, the remains of what may have been a staircase for ablution. But there are no bones, no ashes, no blood traces. The site has been excavated multiple times. What was expected has not been found. This is Petra's pattern. To offer shape without function, or function without witness. And yet the structure endures. Aligned perfectly with the rising sun at equinox, the altar platform casts no shadow at noon. The surrounding ledges hold recessed sockets, as if once bearing poles or fabrics, ritual components long gone. Some archaeologists propose these held canopies or banners. Others believe they supported nothing. That the void itself was the ritual. That here, emptiness was the offering. In 2003, an analysis of mineral deposits on the stone floor revealed residues consistent with burnt aromatic resins. Myrrh, frankincense, storax. Substances used not for meat offerings, but for smoke. For scent. The kind of sacrifice that leaves no remains, only atmosphere. A theology of impermanence. The Nabataeans did not worship through idol forms. Dashera, their central deity, remained faceless. Represented by cubes, pillars, or featureless blocks. The gods did not enter statues. They entered space. And the high place, with its wind, light, and sky, may have been built not for spectacle, but for the arrival of absence. To be filled, then emptied. And Petra's architects knew how to shape this threshold. The platform is not the highest point in the region. It is not centered in the city's layout. But it aligns with something deeper, something that shifts each season. The procession stairway that leads to it is carved to hide the final view until the last turn. The moment of arrival is delayed. This is not accident. This is ritual architecture. It is seen in other places. The temple complexes at Delphi, where oracles spoke from within chasms. The pilgrimage steps of Lalibela, where churches are hidden below the surface. The ziggurats of Uar, built as artificial mountains. But Petra does not raise its temples toward heaven. It cuts its sacred spaces into the bones of the earth. In Petra, to ascend is to descend into meaning. And the high place may have been the culmination, not of visibility, but of ritual erasure. What was said here was not meant to echo. What was offered here was not meant to remain. In the absence of inscriptions, the place speaks only in alignment, geometry, silence. In 1978, a stone fragment was uncovered near the ledge, a sliver of betil, split and scorched, with no accompanying structure. It was found buried beneath sand, tucked into a natural niche in the cliff wall. No record exists of its placement. No ceremony is described. It was placed in a space only visible at sunset. Who placed it, and why there? One archaeologist noted in their unpublished field notes, "This site records nothing, but it remembers." And this, perhaps, is the function of the temple with no altar. Not to conduct rites, but to hold the possibility of ritual. Not to teach dogma, but to shape what cannot be recorded. The obelisks remain. The stone channels dry. The scent gone. But the structure endures, not as ruin, but as a condition. To stand here is to feel not presence, but proximity. To something lost. Or something waiting. And Petra does not explain. It only prepares. The Nabataeans had no empire in the traditional sense. No standing army of renown. No imperial capital beyond Petra. No legacy of conquest inscribed into marble. And yet, for over 400 years, they shaped the economy, the politics, and the spiritual movements of a region that swallowed kingdoms whole. They did so by mastering what empires ignore: invisibility. At their peak, from the late 2nd century BCE to the early 1st century CE, the Nabataeans did not expand by seizing territory. They expanded by making themselves indispensable to those who did. Their strength was not in what they ruled, but in what they routed: goods, people, permissions. Control, distributed like shadow. From incense routes stretching across the Arabian Peninsula to trade lines connecting Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia, the Nabataeans sat at the interstices, those unstable, undefined spaces between borders. There, they did not build walls. They offered passage. But passage came at a price. Not always in coin, and not always in goods. Sometimes in silence. To pass unmolested, to cross a dry ravine unchallenged, to arrive in Damascus without vanishing along the way, these were privileges purchased not in public, but in hidden systems of trust. The Nabataeans had perfected the informal contract, and Petra was its ledger. The city served as checkpoint, safe haven, observatory. It read the movement of merchants like a script. It watched caravans like calendars. Those who passed through did so under condition, one written not on stone, but on expectation. We will not be seen, but you will remember we were there. This is not absence. This is strategic opacity. Even their coinage is marked by ambiguity. Nabataean currency, minted primarily during the 1st century BCE and CE, features hybrid iconography, Hellenistic profiles, Aramaic inscriptions, indistinct regalia. It speaks multiple languages without committing to any. The kings are named, but never glorified. The symbols are abstract, the minting quality inconsistent. This was not incompetence. It was polyvalence, a currency that could pass in multiple systems, understood by all, owned by none. To be legible to all while belonging to none, this was Nabataean diplomacy. They sent no armies across the Mediterranean. They sent merchants, mimics, intermediaries. Their embassies were not fortresses, they were toll stations. And that subtle dominion extended beyond trade. In 2004, fragments of a Nabataean-built outpost were uncovered near Dumat al-Jandal in northern Saudi Arabia. Among the remains, ceramics, storage jars, and an inscription in a script only partially identified. Not Nabataean, not Sephatic, a hybrid of both. Evidence suggests the site served as a way station, perhaps for controlling desert transit across territories where no one polity could claim control. It is the kind of place that would never appear on Roman maps. And yet, it defined how Rome's goods moved. And in Petra itself, there are almost no inscriptions celebrating conquest. No triumphal arches. No public declarations of war or victory. Instead, there are niches. Small recesses cut into walls. Some high above footpaths. Some barely visible in shadow. In each, a betil. And sometimes beside it, a cryptic line. He passed in peace. She bore fruit in the year of the storm. He crossed the threshold. These are not epitaphs. They are records, not of death, but of movement. In the Nabataean world, control was not measured by how many were ruled, but by how many passed through. And Petra, carved from stone and silence, was the matrix of that movement. Even their gods reflect this logic. Dushara, the central deity, is described in inscriptions as he of the mountain. But no mythology survives. No acts. No parables. Only titles. Dushara does not speak. Dushara permits. This god does not intervene. He allows passage, or doesn't. The same with Al-Uzza, a goddess shared with pre-Islamic Arabian traditions. Her name appears in tombs and dedications. But her image is absent. Her temple, once presumed to exist in Petra's eastern cliffs, remains unconfirmed. What survives is a void, a space referenced but not found. Even their divinities practice disappearance. And perhaps this was the source of Nabataean endurance. To control movement without declaring ownership. To offer sanctuary without inviting permanence. But invisibility, once institutionalized, can become too complete. By the 3rd century CE, the networks the Nabataeans once managed had fragmented. Roman fortifications spread deeper into Arabia. New trade routes bypassed Petra. The fragile equilibrium of negotiated passage dissolved into regulated oversight. Bureaucracy replaced trust. And what had once been empire without borders became emptiness without memory. But not entirely. In 2016, a massive rectangular platform was discovered beneath the sands south of Petra's central colonnade. Using satellite imaging and drone surveys, archaeologists identified it as an unrecorded monumental structure, its layout suggesting ceremonial or administrative function. No direct path leads to it. No inscription explains it. It had been deliberately concealed by later constructions. It was not destroyed. It was covered. Like a ledger hidden after the final entry. Perhaps Petra was always intended to be temporary in the way that pathways are. Not built to last. Built to be passed through. But in encoding passage, it became something else. A map of absence. An empire that no longer exists, except in the intervals. And even now, something remains of that logic. A way of organizing power that does not declare itself. A way of shaping systems that leave no archive. A way of surviving in the space between. Petra does not fall. It fragments. No army breaches its gates. No fire consumes its heart. The city, so carefully carved, so quietly aligned, does not burn, does not scream. Instead, it begins to fail the way stone fails. Silently and under pressure. There is no single year that marks Petra's end. But one year cuts deepest, 363 CE. The earth moves. An earthquake, violent, inland, and unforgiving, tears through the Levant. Its epicenter is likely near present-day Aqaba, but the tremor reaches far. Jerusalem, Beirut, the Sinai. And Petra. It strikes in the early morning. The damage is not just vertical. It is psychological. Temples crack. Columns fall. Aqueducts shear from cliffs. Entire facades fracture, not all visibly, but enough to shift the balance of centuries. In the heart of Petra, Qasr al-Bint is split. The stairs of the great temple buckle. The ceremonial platforms tilt ever so slightly, but enough to disrupt flow, alignment, ritual. And beneath the surface, something worse. Water channels rupture. Cisterns collapse. What does it mean when a city built on hidden water suddenly cannot hold it? In the months that follow, repair is attempted. Stones are res-tacked, paths cleared, a few buildings reinforced. But the damage cannot be undone. The hydrological system, the city's nervous system, is broken. Water no longer arrives where it must. Some channels flood, others dry entirely. And Petra's silence grows heavier. The earthquake does not end the city, but it interrupts its memory. Because Petra was not a place of monuments alone. It was a place of function. Each carved chamber, each stepped path, each obscured cistern, it worked not in isolation, but in orchestration. The city was a system. And now, its systems are misaligned. After the earthquake, the Byzantine authorities, then stewards of the region, build anew. A cathedral is raised on the eastern ridge. Mosaic floors laid. A new basilica appears atop older Nabataean foundations. These are not acts of restoration. They are replacement. They repurpose what stands. But they do not understand what lies beneath. In the Petra church, mosaic inscriptions in Greek praise local bishops. But below the floor, older rooms are sealed. The scrolls discovered in the 1990s, charred and pressed beneath centuries of rubble, suggest a final burst of writing, of record-making, as if someone tried to preserve what could no longer be practiced. And then, nothing. No chronicles. No letters. Just partial names. Financial accounts. A catalogue of disappearance. The city's design, once flowing, interlocked, is now obstructed. Paths fall out of use. Storage rooms become burial chambers. Temples lose their seasonal alignment as walls settle into new angles. The solstice light no longer strikes where it once did. Even the tombs, carved with mathematical reverence, begin to distort. Rainwater, once perfectly redirected, now runs uncontrolled down facades, erasing detail. Stones soften, blur, fragment. And yet, there is no mass exodus, no genocide, no flame. Instead, the city's collapse is so gradual, so well-mannered, that for a time, no one speaks of it as collapse at all. Petra becomes background. By the 5th century, the city is no longer a center. Trade routes now favor Byzantine ports along the Red Sea. The great incense roads shift westward. Maritime routes dominate. Land caravans, once the veins of Petra, are reclassified as risk. And the city's greatest vulnerability emerges. It had no reason to remain once the movement stopped. The very logic that sustained Petra, its invisibility, its discretion, its mastery of silence, now makes its decline hard to trace. No foreign chronicler laments its fall. No Nabataean account mourns its passing. No neighboring power notes its absence. Even the Madaba map, a 6th century Byzantine mosaic depicting the Holy Land, marks Petra only faintly, as a stylized structure tucked along a minor road. No longer feared. No longer negotiated with. Just acknowledged. And that acknowledgement is nearly the last. Centuries pass. The city recedes further, not just in habitation but in concept. It becomes a memory spoken only by local Bedouin tribes. A place of wind, of myth, of stone. By the 12th century, Crusader maps place vague castles in the region. But Petra is no longer named. Even memory, it seems, needs infrastructure. And when that infrastructure breaks, memory erodes. But Petra does not vanish. It remains entire, intact in parts, weathered but standing. Its facades fade, but their angles still catch light. Its tombs collapse inward, but their thresholds remain. The city continues not as ruin, but as persistence without context. And for nearly 700 years, it waits. Until, in 1812, a man in disguise follows whispers through the desert. A Swiss traveler, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, reaches Petra dressed as a Muslim scholar. He speaks Arabic. He offers sacrifice. And he writes, "A scene of romantic desolation." The effect of the whole was inconceivably striking. He does not understand what he sees, but he knows he has found something that was not meant to be refound. He leaves with sketches, descriptions, and with that, Petra re-enters the modern archive, as wonder, as tourist spectacle, as a ruin. But what collapsed was never just a city. It was a way of being known, a way of structuring memory without visibility, a world that measured power not in presence, but in withdrawal. And once broken, once made legible, it could not be restored. Petra endures, but the logic that sustained it no longer works. And the sky, once used to guide, align, and sanctify, now only watches. To understand Petra's decline is to misunderstand its design. It was never meant to last as ruins. Not in the way we imagine ruins. Petra was carved not to crumble into romantic decay, but to hold shape without explanation, even in absence. But something changed. Not in the stones. In the context. By the 6th century CE, Petra was no longer read as it was intended. Its geometries, so carefully placed, no longer aligned with the rhythms of those who remained. Byzantine bishops built over solstice-marked temples. Arab tribes passed through, repurposing carved rooms into stables, cisterns, memory. The angles that once communicated now misfired. The light no longer landed where it once told time. And the spaces meant to be walked a certain way, turned into storage, debris, stillness. The architecture didn't break. The meaning did. Geometry, in Petra, was never ornamental. It was narrative. The way light cut across a facade at dusk. The way a stair narrowed, not for defense, but for compression, forcing stillness before entry. The distance between a tomb and a temple. The depth of a niche. All of it spoke. And all of it required participation. The city was built with the assumption that its users understood its symbols, not as metaphors, but as instructions. The curved passage meant pause. The stepped courtyard meant assent of mind. The windowless room wasn't ignorance, it was invitation to remember without sight. When that literacy vanished, so did the city. What remained was sculpture. Monumentality without grammar. In 1830, European explorers began measuring Petra's monuments. They drew columns, facades, angles. They compared them to Roman basilicas, Hellenistic temples. They called the treasury Corinthian. They called the monastery a mystery. They mapped everything except the intention. No one asked, why were these forms isolated? Why no repetition? Because Petra was not designed to broadcast a central idea. It was built to contain multiple centers, each segment aligned to a different function, moment, memory. Its geometry was plural, nested, time-bound, and time had moved on. Yet Petra remained, like a machine designed for a power source that no longer existed. Its doors opened, but their alignment to the stars was off by degrees. Its stairways climbed, but not toward purpose. Its tombs held no names, and thus no return. And still, the geometry persisted. In 2011, a digital reconstruction project used 3D mapping to model the city's original sightlines and architectural axes. What they found startled researchers. Several key structures, notably the high place of sacrifice, the monastery, and the Great Temple, form a triangular arrangement visible only from aerial elevation. A triangulation, geometrically exact, cosmically symbolic, built into the terrain. But Petra was not a city of eagles. It was a city of humans. Who, then, was that geometry for? Was it a cosmic message? A spatial spell? A way to fix the city in divine memory, even if human memory failed? Or was it simply how the Nabataeans thought? Spatially, cyclically, invisibly. A geometry that was not about sight, but orientation. Modern archaeologists speak of hidden axes in Petra, visual lines that only reveal themselves at certain times of day or in certain seasons. Light corridors, solstice alignments, acoustics that double in winter months, having in summer. Geometry used not to command, but to respond. To sun, to wind, to breath. And when the world stopped listening, when the traders stopped arriving, the priests stopped walking, the stars were no longer charted, the city didn't collapse. It unhooked from interpretation. What remains is not failure. It is the consequence of a designed silence, left unattended. In 2019, researchers using infrared imaging identified an underground chamber beneath the monastery plaza, completely symmetrical, sealed, dry. Its proportions mirror the chamber above it, inverted. A mirror space beneath the visible. No known entry connects them. The chamber is not mentioned in any document, but its geometry is perfect. What purpose did it serve? No one can say. Not yet. But its presence suggests a chilling truth. Petra was built not only to endure, but to disappear on its own terms. To survive erasure not by resisting it, but by designing it. And this is perhaps its most dangerous idea. That forgetting can be engineered, not as loss, but as geometry. Beneath Petra, there are chambers that have no entrances. Not collapsed, not buried. Sealed in design. Carved into cliff bases, behind columns, beneath monuments. Spaces that from the outside appear structural, decorative, or inert. But inside, they hold volume. Measurable, traceable, unmapped. In 2008, a ground-penetrating radar scan of the western slope revealed what appeared to be an intact subterranean vault beneath the colonnaded street. Rectangular, uniform, and completely encased. There was no surface breach, no stair, no vent. A space built to be unentered. What do we do with a room that was never meant to receive footsteps? Call it a mistake. A quarry scar, a geological anomaly. But too many exist, and they are not random. Across Petra's central basin, sealed rooms cluster in patterns, beneath temples, under thresholds, inside freestanding platforms. Some contain no air pockets. Others, when tapped by geophysical sensors, produce resonance, as if the walls themselves are listening. We tend to think of architecture as a discipline of use. Walls, ceilings, doors, all functioning parts of purpose. But in Petra, some architecture behaves like a code, structured, recursive, silent. These rooms are not accidents. They are instructions left untranslated. One chamber beneath the so-called garden temple emits a low-frequency echo, only perceivable when the outer retaining wall is struck at intervals. It was discovered not by archaeologists, but by a stonemason examining seismic strain. The chamber remains unentered. Its measurements suggest symmetry. Its sound suggests intent. But what is the intent of a sealed volume, carved by hand, then hidden? To store, to sanctify, to wait, or to withhold. The ancient world knew of sealed chambers. The inner sanctum of Solomon's temple, the Egyptian serdabs where statues of the dead were placed behind walls, visible only through a narrow slit. But these rooms served ritual. They contained meaning. Petra's sealed rooms deny it. There are no vents, no viewers, no trace of occupation. And yet, they are everywhere. One beneath the urn tomb, another below the high place, a third deep within the mountain's western fold, discovered in 1995 when an illegal excavation partially exposed a sidewall. Inside, no objects, just a carved alcove and a flat floor. Tool marks on the ceiling, as if the work ended mid-gesture. Some have suggested these are failed constructions. But failure leaves residue, tools, fragments, debris. These rooms are clean, their walls smooth, their angles consistent. They were not abandoned. They were concluded, as if the carving itself was the act, not the occupancy. And if so, we are left with an unsettling possibility. That Petra was never meant to be fully known. That some of its greatest efforts went into ensuring opacity. Because what is a city, if it contains volumes meant never to open? What kind of memory is that? In 2017, a team conducting acoustic analysis of Petra's interior tombs found something stranger still. Several sealed spaces respond to external sound, resonating at harmonic frequencies when nearby chambers are spoken in. The effect is subtle, but measurable. One researcher, in a closed report, described the effect as a passive architecture of listening. No explanation followed, and perhaps none is needed. Petra's builders may have understood something modern systems resist, that not all knowledge is made to be accessed. Some is made to be protected through removal, a theology not of presence, but of non-entry. Petra's silence is not just absence, it is strategy. These rooms, sealed, unentered, unmapped, are not failures of excavation. They are reminders that even a carved city can preserve what cannot be revealed. And in that preservation, Petra becomes something else. Not a ruin, not a monument, but a containment system for forgotten beliefs, built not to express, but to withhold expression until the right conditions return. And if they do not return, the rooms remain, waiting, not empty, just unopened. Civilizations fall in many ways. By war, by famine, by rot. But some do not fall. They are simply rewritten, not as enemies, but as irrelevancies. The Nabataeans do not vanish in smoke. They vanish in redefinition. After the Roman annexation in 106 CE, their names remain for a time, in contracts, in coinage, in stone. But by the late 3rd century, they are no longer mentioned as a people, not even as a memory, not even as a myth. And yet, no mass grave, no exile, no genocide. So where did they go? They didn't. They were reclassified. The process begins slowly. In imperial documents, Nabataean territories are redrawn as Arabia Petrea. Civic institutions are renamed. Temples are converted or closed. By the early Byzantine period, the administrative language has shifted entirely, from Nabataean Aramaic to Greek and Latin. The people remain. Their identity does not. And that erasure, quiet, thorough, bloodless, may be the most effective conquest of all. A report from the 4th century CE, written by the Roman official Sextus Julius Africanus, describes the soft assimilation of the desert peoples. He names no tribes, offers no terms, only the phrase. Their names we do not record, for they have become ours. Not enemies, not partners, just absorbed silence. The word Nabataean becomes a descriptor, not a people. By the 5th century, Byzantine writers use it to refer to nomads, merchants, or heretics, interchangeably. A Nabataean might be a stonemason, or a magician, or a thief. The word drifts from nationhood into insult. It is the final stage of cultural disappearance, when your name remains, but not your meaning. In Petra, the stone inscriptions reflect this loss. Earlier tombs name kings, priests, traders. By the late period, names are fewer. Titles vanish. What was once son of Obodas, priest of Dushra, becomes here he lies. He passed in quiet. A civilization folded into generic death. But even in disappearance, fragments resist. Nabataean Aramaic does not fully die. Its script becomes the scaffolding for later Arabic calligraphy. Certain linguistic forms, verb constructions, suffixes, even poetic structures, linger into early Islamic texts. The language forgets its name, but not its grammar. And among the tribes of the southern Levant and northern Arabia, echoes persist. Oral genealogies claim descent from desert kings. Songs reference cities made of stone, where no birds sing, but the walls remember. Whether those songs are memory or myth is unclear. But the persistence of naming, Rakmu, Dushra, Al-Uzza, suggests something deeper than folklore. Something that survived in whispers. Because even the architecture refuses full assimilation. The great facades of Petra, the treasury, the monastery, the urn tomb, do not resemble the Roman world. Nor do they mirror the temples of Syria, or Arabia, or Judea. They sit outside lineage. They resist placement. Tourists and scholars have tried for centuries to classify them. Late Hellenistic, Romanized Nabataean, Greco-Arabic hybrid. But none of these hold. Because Petra's stones were carved by a people who disappeared without surrender. And perhaps that is why the city still unsettles. It is not the silence alone. It is the knowledge that the ones who made it were not removed. They were retained, then unspoken. An archaeologist once remarked, "We have all of Petra's bones, but none of its voice." But that's not quite true. The voice is there, just not in language we still know how to read. Not in writing. In resistance to definition. The Nabataeans did not hide. They became unreadable. And in that unreadability lies a challenge. Because history tends to remember what can be categorized. Nations, wars, kings. Petra offers none of these clearly. It offers presence without claim, memory without inscription. And so it is excluded. From maps. From epics. From the timelines we trust. Until the ruins are all that remain. And in their endurance, a question. What does it mean to survive without recognition? To live beyond your name. To be erased, not from life, but from legibility. By the 7th century, Petra no longer appears on maps as a center. Its name, if listed at all, is small. Sometimes in the margin. Sometimes misspelled. Sometimes relocated entirely. As if the city had drifted, not just from memory, but from geography itself. And yet the land does not move. The mountains remain. The wadis still cut their narrow paths. The columns lie where they fell. The rooms remain carved. It is the maps that forget. This inversion is not accidental. It marks a transformation far more profound than disappearance. Petra does not fall because it was lost. Petra falls because the systems that knew how to see it changed. The coordinates remained. The meaning did not. In the Islamic conquests of the 7th century, the region is absorbed into the early caliphates. Trade shifts again, no longer westward, but north and east. Mecca becomes a pole of gravity. Damascus, a new center. Petra, once the gate between desert and sea, becomes a backroad. It is not destroyed. It is unacknowledged. Early Muslim historians mention the region, but not the city. The Prophet Muhammad passes through nearby lands. Later caliphs secure the caravan routes. But Petra, now invisible to political needs, fades into spiritual disinterest. There is no Qibla here. No martyrs. No battles to sanctify the stone. And so the maps shrink it, until it fits inside a footnote. But what if it was the maps that changed, not the place? In 743 CE, a traveler named Al-Harith ibn Sa'idi writes of a city among cliffs, where the air does not settle and the walls whisper in shadow. The name Petra is not mentioned, but the description matches the narrow gorge, the sick, leading into the ancient city. He writes, "The stones were not homes. They were prayers no longer answered. Even in passing, something persists." But by the 9th century, Petra has exited the official record entirely. The Abbasid cartographers compiling the Kitab al-Masalik wa al-Mamalik omit it. Not from error, but from redefinition. It is no longer a way station. no longer a node. It has become a void on the route. And yet the void holds power. Because the maps did not only erase Petra, they imposed new names on old absences. The place once called Rakmu becomes Wadi Musa, the Valley of Moses. A place re-anchored to a different narrative, a different scripture. Not invented, but redirected. A sacred geography begins to overwrite the spatial memory of the ancient city. Not by conquest, but by reframing. Pilgrims pass nearby, never seeing the facades. Stories arise of springs struck by a prophet's staff, of caves that hide secrets, of mountains where men waited for signs. The structures become symbols without origin. And the irony deepens. Petra, built to be unseen, strategically veiled, geometrically controlled, now becomes truly invisible. Not by design, but by cultural drift. And the new maps do not know how to see what was once built to be passed through, not looked at. Even modern rediscovery does not fully reverse the erasure. In 1812, when Burckhardt reintroduces Petra to the West, he does so not as a historian, but as a trespasser. He lies about his purpose. He uses false names. He pays for protection from locals who suspect his interest. And when he writes of Petra, it is not as a place with meaning. It is as a ruin with awe. The shift is complete. What had been a city of systems becomes a backdrop. What had been ritual becomes romance. The maps return, but now they chart wonder, not understanding. Tourists follow. Scholars measure, but always from the surface. The inner alignments, the water channels, the acoustic chambers, the sealed volumes, remain unmapped. Not because they are hidden, but because they do not fit the cartographic mind. Petra has re-entered the world, but not on its own terms. It becomes scenery, a UNESCO site, a marvel, but not a system. And so the tragedy is doubled. First, a place that withdrew itself from control was erased by powers that required legibility. Then, a place designed to be unreadable was rediscovered only as spectacle. The maps found it again, but they did not know what to call it. And Petra, patient, unyielding, remains outside the lines. Petra does not end. It fades, from function, from context, from the networks it once commanded. But it does not collapse, not in the way cities are supposed to. It endures without rhythm. It remains without pulse. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to surface. A structure that was never dependent on history to survive. Because Petra was not built for chronology. It was built for condition. The logic of its design, the sealed rooms, the hidden soundscapes, the unreachable chambers, is not temporal. It is not tied to rulers, to calendars, to the slow drift of empire. It is pre-temporal, meaning it does not expire. It simply waits. By the 21st century, the city is flooded again, not with caravans, but with memory. Excavators and tourists, satellites and sensors, drone surveys and photogrammetry. Petra is seen more fully now than it has ever been. And yet, much of it remains unknowable. The passageways are measured, but the alignments still resist explanation. Tombs are mapped, but their purpose slips away. The function of entire zones remains speculative, ritual, residential, defensive, administrative. The answers do not resolve. Not because the city is unclear, but because it was never designed to be read by us. Petra was a mirror for a different mind. A culture that moved without needing permanence. That aligned its gods to wind, to stone, to transition. That buried its archives in thresholds, not texts. It is architecture as code, written in spatial logic, emotional geometry, and atmospheric silence. And like any code, it is inert until the right cipher returns, which may never happen. In 2023, a small chamber behind the monastery's western retaining wall was discovered, completely untouched, perfectly preserved. It contained no iconography, No offerings. Just a series of carved channels on the floor, parallel, slanted, leading nowhere. One archaeologist called it the most confusing find in a decade. But perhaps confusion is not a failure. Perhaps it is the city's last defense. Because Petra does not demand belief. It demands interpretation without resolution. It was always a city of thresholds, between rock and air, desert and water, ritual and movement. A place not to settle, but to pass through correctly. And so now, as it endures beyond relevance, it becomes something else. Not a city, not a site, a test of how much we can know without colonizing with meaning, of how much we can recover without forcing return. Because Petra was never lost. It was only waiting to be misread. And perhaps that was its final design. To teach us the cost of visibility. To remind us that what survives longest may be that which chooses not to be known. To offer its silence, not as absence, but as the last intact structure of a world that refused to right itself. The mountain is still. Long after the scripts ended, long after the traders vanished, long after the last ritual gave way to weather and time, Petra remains, cut into cliff, framed by shadow, waiting without asking. Not as ruin, as remainder. Its symbols no longer declare. They resist. Its rooms no longer guide. They withhold. And in that refusal, measured, deliberate, almost holy, something endures beyond memory. A logic untouched by chronology. A presence unbound from presence. Petra did not fall. It was not erased. It was released, from the need to explain itself to those who could no longer listen. That is not collapse. That is completion. So if some part of this place reached you, if something unspoken stirred in the silence between facts, then let that remain. Let it remain unspoken. Let it remain unresolved. Because some cities do not ask to be reclaimed, only remembered. And if this journey uncovered something worth keeping, leave behind a trace, a comment, a memory, a word. That's how stories return, through those who choose to remember. Have a good night. Sweet dreams.